There's a kind of silence that does not belong in a television studio. The kind that falls when the lights are still up and the cameras are still rolling and 300 people have forgotten how to breathe. That is the silence that settled over the Family Feud stage on a Thursday afternoon in September, when a woman named Renee Caldwell had been standing at the contestant podium for 47 seconds, not answering a question, not looking at Steve Harvey, not looking at the board. Just looking at something nobody else in that room could see yet. And the only question that mattered in that moment was not worth $500. It was worth 16 years. Most people who walk onto that stage are carrying hope. Renee Caldwell walked on carrying something heavier than hope, something that had no clean name. She was 41 years old, from a small river town in southern Ohio called Gallipolis, the kind of place where the Ohio River bends and slows, and the old men fish from the same concrete wall their fathers fished from, where the summers are green and thick, and the winters come in off the water with a particular authority that reminds you the river does not care about your plans. She had grown up in a yellow house on Locust Street with her mother Carolyn and her sister Donna, and she had learned early that certain things in life required you to be tougher than you felt, because the feeling would pass but the requirement would not. That was not a lesson anyone taught her directly. It was a lesson the world demonstrated repeatedly until she had absorbed it into the way she stood. She was 41 years old, and she had the kind of face that looked like it had been through weather, not hard, not bitter, just honest in the way that faces get honest when they have stopped performing for people who are not paying attention anyway. She wore a cream blouse she had ironed 3 times that morning. Her hair was pulled back the way her own mother used to pull it back when she was a little girl getting ready for something important. And that morning, standing at the bathroom mirror in the Atlanta hotel, Renee had noticed herself doing the same thing and had had to sit down on the edge of the tub before she could finish. Some gestures carry more than the person making them understands. Some gestures are the body's way of saying, you come from something. You are not alone in this. She had driven 7 hours with her sister Donna, her nephew Darius, her cousin Felicia, and her Aunt Mee, who was 83 years old and had brought a sandwich in her purse because she did not trust television food, and she was not interested in learning otherwise at this point in her life. The Caldwell family was on the show because Aunt Mee had entered them in a sweepstakes 2 years earlier without telling anyone, and by the time the producers called, it felt less like luck and more like instruction. Aunt Mee, when pressed, said only that she had a feeling. Aunt Mee's feelings had a documented track record. Her feeling in 1987 had caused her to purchase a used Buick she had no practical reason for, and that Buick had broken down on the highway outside Columbus, and the man who stopped to help her had been her husband of 31 years, until his death in 2019. After that, nobody in the family questioned the feelings. You worked with them the way you work with weather. To understand what Renee was carrying into that studio, to understand why her answers in fast money came from a place below thought, why her hand moved toward her purse when the word photograph lit up the board, why she had said I've been ready in a way that meant more than one thing at once. You have to go back to the winter she was 24 years old. You have to go back further than that, actually. You have to go back to the girl she was before any of it, because that girl is the one who made every choice that made everything else possible, including the 16 years of what came after. Renee Caldwell at 24 was working double shifts at a call center in Columbus, saving money for a paralegal course she had enrolled in twice and had to drop twice when something more urgent came up. She was sharp and quick and had a memory for details that several supervisors had noticed and not yet figured out what to do with. She had a 2-bedroom apartment she shared with a woman named Kira, a nursing student who kept the kitchen immaculate and played the same jazz album every Sunday morning. Renee's life had a forward feeling to it, not triumphant, but pointed, directional, aimed at something she could not yet name but could feel the outline of. Kira graduated in the spring and moved home to Cleveland, and Renee kept the apartment alone for 8 months, which was both financially difficult and privately necessary. She discovered that she needed at that point in her life to understand what she was like without the company of other people organizing her days. She was like this. She woke early and was most herself in the first hour of the morning before the world required anything of her. She wrote lists, not to-do lists exactly, but inventories, catalogs of small observations. The pharmacist on 3rd Street who always asked how she was doing and waited for the actual answer. The way the call center hummed at night like a low-grade anxiety made audible. The birds on the fire escape that appeared every morning at 6:15 regardless of weather, which she found obscurely encouraging. She had not known before that year that she was a person who found birds encouraging. She was learning, at 23 and then 24, who she was going to be. And she was going to be someone who paid attention, who kept records of small things, who believed that small things added up to something, who was not willing to move through her life as if it were happening to someone else. That quality, the attentiveness, the refusal to be a passenger in her own story, was also the quality that would, in a few years, make her the kind of mother who kept both prints of a photograph and wrote 9 letters, and stood in a courthouse parking lot in February and drove home to Gallipoli's and sat at the kitchen table and started the 4th letter. She was building herself that year in Columbus, deliberately, and she was worth building. She met Marcus in the spring at a friend's cookout. He was funny and attentive and from Phoenix originally, which seemed merely interesting at the time. They were together for 8 months before Renee got pregnant, and by the time she understood what she was going to do, Marcus had been offered a job back in Arizona, and the conversation about what came next was one of those conversations that both people approach with the best intentions and leave with the worst outcome. Not because either of them was a bad person. Because they were 24 and 26 and unprepared and frightened, and the frightened version of two good people can do a great deal of damage without meaning to. Chloe was born on the 3rd of February during a snowstorm that closed the highway and made the nurses joke that this child was already dramatic. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Eyes that were dark and watchful from the first hour, looking around the yellow hospital room with an expression of focused assessment that made the night nurse laugh and say, "She's taking inventory." Renee held her and felt the world rearrange itself around that single fact, not figuratively, not as a manner of speaking, but actually, physically, as if gravity had shifted its center. She named her Chloe Ellen. The middle name was for her mother, Carolyn, who had died 14 months before and who would never meet this granddaughter, which was a grief stitched inside a larger grief. The duck had been the first gift. Renee's mother had bought it before she died, had wrapped it in yellow tissue paper and written on the tag in her careful handwriting, "For the one who is coming." She had known Renee was going to have a daughter one day, the way she knew certain things, a quality of foreknowledge the family discussed quietly and did not fully explain. The duck was soft and yellow and weighted in the body so it sat upright on its own, with a small red ribbon stitched around its neck and glass eyes that caught the light. It sat at the corner of the bassinet in the yellow Cincinnati hospital room, and Renee looked at it the first morning and thought about her mother, and then thought about her daughter, and those two things were the same feeling and not the same feeling simultaneously, which is something that is hard to explain and instantly recognizable to anyone who has experienced it. 4 days. She had Chloe for 4 days in that room. 4 days is not enough. Anyone who has held a child for 4 days and then lost them will tell you that it is barely the opening sentence of a story, barely long enough to learn the particular weight of a head against a collarbone, the exact rhythm of a sleep breath, the specific cry that means cold versus hungry versus "I simply require your presence, and I will not apologize for that." Not long enough to build any defense against losing it. Barely long enough to understand, at a cellular level, what you would do to keep this thing safe. The custody situation began as a disagreement and became a legal proceeding and became, gradually, something that ate through money and time and the kind of energy that does not replenish easily. There was no villain in the story. There was fear and there was immaturity, and there was a judge who made a decision based on the information available, and the information available was incomplete. And by the time Renee had completed the picture, the decision had already taken root. She cashiered. She saved. She got to Phoenix for Chloe's first birthday with a gift wrapped in yellow paper and a smile she held steady for 6 hours until she was back in her rental car. And then she cried for 40 minutes in a gas station parking lot, which she allowed herself. And then she drove to the motel and called Donna and talked until 1 in the morning. For Chloe's second summer, Renee had saved enough for 3 weeks in Phoenix, 3 weeks in a motel on the edge of the city, walking her daughter to the park every morning, teaching her the word duck because the toy was always in the stroller. She watched Chloe approach the duck pond cautiously, with both arms slightly out for balance, stopping 3 feet back to assess the ducks, who assessed her in return with identical seriousness. The way Chloe said duck every time, not as a label but as a greeting, as if it mattered that the ducks knew she knew what they were. Renee had a disposable camera. She used all 24 exposures in 3 days and bought another one. She was not documenting the visit exactly. She was making evidence. She was building a record of a child who existed and was real and was hers in the only way she had available to her. She watched Chloe pull herself to standing on a park bench and then take her first actual steps on warm Arizona concrete, 5 steps before sitting down hard and looking up with an expression of profound surprise. Renee had her arms out the whole time. She did not catch her, but she was there. In the evenings, after returning Chloe to the house on the east side of Phoenix, she would drive back to the motel and sit on the bed and feel the specific emptiness of having been completely present with someone and then having that presence removed. It was different from ordinary loneliness. It was the loneliness of abundance, which is worse in some ways because it includes the knowledge of what you are without. She had 3 weeks. She used every hour. And when the 3 weeks were over, she drove to the airport in the August heat and did not cry until she was through security, and then she cried for a long time in a bathroom stall with the door locked, which she allowed herself. The restraining order came out of a visit that went wrong. Renee had driven through the night from Columbus 14 hours, arriving at 7 in the morning unannounced, exhausted in the way that erodes judgment, frightened in the way that makes a person seem aggressive to someone who does not know them. The situation at the door escalated quickly. Voices were raised. A neighbor called. A report was filed. The order was issued pending investigation. The investigation took a year. The legal challenge took another 8 months. By the end of it, Renee had spent $4,000 she did not have and had worked a second job for 11 months to pay it off. There was one day that Renee did not speak about to anyone for a long time. Not to Donna, not to Aunt Me, not to the women at work who had become something like friends over the years. The day the restraining order was lifted. She had been in a courthouse hallway in Columbus in February, 9 years after Chloe was born, sitting in a plastic chair outside a hearing room with her legal aid attorney beside her waiting. The hallway smelled of floor cleaner and recycled air. A water fountain dripped every 40 seconds, she had counted. The order was lifted at 11:14 in the morning. Her attorney shook her hand. She thanked him. She gathered her bag and walked out into a February morning, gray sky, bare trees, a few pigeons on the courthouse steps being determinedly ordinary about the whole thing, and she stood there for a long moment not entirely sure what to do with herself. She had spent 9 years fighting for this day. She had not expected to feel how you feel when you have been carrying something so long that putting it down reveals the absence rather than filling it. How the lifting of a weight leaves you with the awareness of where the weight was, which is its own particular kind of empty. She was free to contact her daughter, but freedom is not the same as closeness. Freedom is only the removal of the obstacle. Everything else still requires work. She stood on the courthouse steps until the cold got into her hands, and then she went to find her car, and she drove home to Gallipoli's, and she sat at the kitchen table and started the 4th letter. The years between the courthouse day and the taping had a particular texture, not dramatic, not collapsing. Just the steady, difficult work of remaining upright in a life that had a permanent absence at the center of it, and that required, every day, the conscious choice to keep living forward rather than circling backward. Renee had gotten so good at the choice that it had stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like character, like the person she simply was. She had learned that loving something you cannot reach does not have to hollow you out. It can if you let it. She had seen that version, had watched women in similar positions become consumed by the grief, had seen the grief become the organizing principle of a life, had understood the pull of it, how the grief at least guarantees the love is always present, always the loudest thing in the room. She had chosen differently, not because the love was less, because the love was the reason to choose differently. You do not honor a child by becoming unable to function in the world the child is not yet in. You honor a child by building a life worth coming home to. That was the operating theory. It had held. She had a house with a porch and a dogwood tree she had planted the spring she moved in that had taken 3 years to bloom and which bloomed every April now without her having to do anything, which she found disproportionately comforting. Some things you plant and tend, and eventually they simply do what they were always going to do. She kept writing anyway. Not every month, sometimes she could not find the words without them becoming about the absence rather than about the love, and she had made a decision early on that the letters needed to be about the love. She wrote 9 letters in 16 years. Each one started differently. The 4th started with, "I learned today that there is a teacher in the school district who has your last name, and I spent 20 minutes in my car wondering if she is a relative of yours, and not knowing was worse than not wondering would have been." The 7th started with, "You are 13 years old today, and I want you to know that I have been thinking about you since 5:30 this morning." Each one ended the same way, "I love you. I am here. Whenever you are ready." The photograph was taken when Chloe was 9 months old, at a visit Renee's aunt had helped fund. Chloe asleep on a yellow blanket in afternoon light, the duck tucked under one arm, one small fist curled against her cheek. Renee had taken it on a disposable camera and had it developed at a pharmacy and stood in the parking lot looking at it until the pharmacist came outside to check on her. She had a second print made when the edges of the first began to soften from handling. Both copies went into the same wallet sleeve. She had carried them for 16 years, not as mementos but as facts, daily confirmation that this person existed, that she was real and growing and somewhere in the world, which was terrible and true and necessary to keep in front of her. She had been managing the deli counter at Haynes Family Market for 11 years by the time of the taping. The job was not what she had imagined for herself at 24 in Columbus. But she had arrived at it through a series of decisions that each made sense at the time, and she had found, somewhere in her mid-30s, that she had stopped measuring her life against the one she had imagined and had started inhabiting the one she was actually in. There was a specific pleasure in it she had not expected. The rhythm of it, the early arrival, the setup, the particular logic of managing a cold case, the conversations that happened across a deli counter, which were a category unto themselves. People told her about their weeks, their health, their grandchildren, their difficult neighbors. Mr. Patterson, who came in every Tuesday, always said the same thing when she handed him his order: "You never forget." She did not forget. She had learned early that remembering what people told you was a form of love, and she had practiced it every day for 11 years, and it had given her a life full of people who felt seen by her, which was its own return. She was good at her job. She was good at the life surrounding it, and she had stopped apologizing internally for the fact that this was true while still believing another person existed somewhere in Arizona who did not yet know her. The absence and the life ran parallel. She had learned to hold both. That was not a small thing. That was the whole thing. Steve Harvey noticed her before the taping started. He walked over during warm-up and asked about the drive. She told him 7 hours, and he said, "You must really want to play this game," and she laughed a real laugh. Then she said, "I want to win the money for my sister's restaurant. She's been trying to open it for 4 years," which was true, and not the whole truth. Steve filed it away and let the game come. The Caldwells were loose and loud and good. Aunt Me answered a question about what you find in a grandmother's kitchen by listing 7 items before the buzzer, and the audience loved every second of it. Darius was quick and percussive, slapping the podium with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for an official context to do exactly this. Donna was strategic in the quiet way of someone who has managed a small business through difficult years. And Renee anchored them, not loudly, not with performance, but with a kind of rootedness that made everyone around her more confident. They won the main game and moved to fast money with $81,000 within reach. Renee stood at the podium and rolled her shoulders back. Steve said, 20 seconds, you ready? And she said, I've been ready. The questions came. Her answers came from somewhere below deliberation, the kind that arrive when you have stopped performing and started simply being present in your own life. Name something a mother keeps even after her children are grown. A photograph. Number 1, 41 points. Steve watched her hand move toward her side and stop. He kept going. Name something people are afraid to let go of. The past. 27. Name a place that feels different when someone you love is missing from it. Home. 32. Name something a child gives a parent that cannot be replaced. Time. 33. 133 points. Donna needed 67. She got 68 on the third question with a whoop that made Aunt Me grab her sandwich wrapper defensively. The Caldwells won $81,000 and the celebration was complete and real and loud. And that should have been the end of the story, except Steve Harvey had not forgotten the hand that moved toward the wallet and stopped. He waited. Let the celebration run. Let Aunt Me confirm her provisions were undamaged. Then he walked over to Renee and said quietly, "What did you mean when you said you've been ready?" Renee looked at him for a long moment, measuring the floor, measuring the room, measuring whether something true was safe to say out loud in front of 300 strangers and a set of cameras. Then she opened her purse and took out the wallet and opened it to the sleeve where both photographs lived. 2 prints. A 9-month-old asleep on a yellow blanket. The edges soft from 16 years of the same hands touching the same corners at the same time of morning. "I have a daughter," she said. "I haven't seen her since she was 4 months old." Steve Harvey went still in a way that was not performance. He looked at the photograph. He looked at Renee. He said, "What is her name?" "Chloe," Renee said. "She turned 16 in February." He held the photographs carefully, the way you hold something that belongs to someone who has been carrying it a very long time. He handed them back. He said, "Give me 1 minute," and he walked off the stage. What Renee did not know, what the Caldwells did not know, what Aunt Me with all her feelings had not known, was that the producers had known about Chloe for 5 months. A researcher, an address in Phoenix, a phone call to a woman named Patricia Acaffer, 64, retired hospital administrator, who had raised Chloe after Chloe's father drifted out of the picture when the girl was 9. Marcus had moved for work, and then moved again, and the drift had become permanent in the way drifts do when no one actively resists them. Patricia was the one who had stayed. She had shown up to school plays and parent-teacher conferences and Saturday morning drives to the library. She had answered hard questions honestly and said I don't know to the ones she could not answer, which Chloe had come to trust more than any confident response she had never quite believed. Patricia listened to the producer's proposal without interrupting. She asked 4 questions. She said, I need to think about this and Chloe needs to decide for herself. I will not influence that decision in either direction. She said, call me back Thursday. And she sat with it for a week, observing her granddaughter, the girl who had arrived at 9 years old, quiet and careful, who had taken 6 months to laugh easily in Patricia's kitchen, who had grown into someone serious and funny in equal parts, who read 2 books simultaneously by chapter, who had a best friend named Jasmine and a quality of attention that made people feel clearly seen. She asked herself, when Chloe was ready, would she know? She thought yes. Chloe had always been honest eventually about what she needed. What Patricia had not told her was the letters. All 9 of them were in a folder on the high shelf of the hallway closet. She had not hidden them, that was not what she told herself, and she believed it. She had been waiting for the right time, which had never arrived, partly because handing over 9 letters required Patricia to also say, I kept these. I decided when you were ready. She was not at peace with that decision. She had been sitting with the weight of it for years. Not guiltily, exactly, guilt implies a clean verdict, and this was not clean. She had made a judgment call from a place of care, trying to protect a child who had arrived at 9 years old carrying something heavy and who needed first to feel safe before she could be asked to carry anything more. She had told herself, when Chloe is older. And then Chloe was older and the timing still did not feel right, and Patricia had come to understand, in the honest way she tried to understand things about herself, that the timing would never feel right, that the right time was a fiction she had been using to avoid a conversation she did not know how to have. The letters were not hers to decide about. They had never been hers to decide about. They were Chloe's and Renee's, and the only thing Patricia had actually been protecting by keeping them was her own uncertainty about what would happen when Chloe read them. She had known this for a long time without being able to look at it directly. She could look at it now. The second week after the call, Patricia sat across from Chloe at the kitchen table and told her about it plainly. What the producers had asked, that it was entirely Chloe's choice. Chloe was quiet for a while. Then she said no. Patricia said okay, that was all, no pressure, no visible disappointment. She got up and made dinner and they ate together and the evening was ordinary. She had raised this girl to know that no was a complete answer. 10 days later, Chloe came into the kitchen at 7 in the morning and said, I have some questions. The questions came in order, careful, specific, the kind that come from days of thinking rather than hours. Why now? What happened if it was terrible? What happened if it was not terrible, because that also seemed like something that could be hard in ways she had not mapped. Patricia answered everything honestly. She said I don't know to the things she did not know. Chloe nodded at both. At the end of it, Chloe said, I know about the letters. Patricia looked up. I found them 2 years ago. I read them all. She looked at her grandmother steadily. You should have given them to me sooner. Patricia sat with that. Then she said, you're right, I should have. They looked at each other across the kitchen table, 2 people being honest about a thing that sat between them. Then Chloe said, they all end the same way. Whenever you are ready. She was quiet for a moment. I think I might be. Patricia went to the hallway and came back with the box and set it on the table. They sat together with it between them, not opening it, just sitting with the weight of what it contained and what it represented. Then Chloe got up and went to her room and came back carrying the yellow duck. She set it on the table beside the box. She said, I want to bring this. Patricia looked at the duck for a long moment, at the small red ribbon around its neck, at the glass eyes that had sat on every nightstand in every house they had ever shared. She said, I know. They flew to Atlanta 2 days before the taping. The production team put them in a hotel and assigned a production assistant named Keisha, who understood that her job was to be present and calm and not fill silence unnecessarily. Chloe watched television and ate room service and called Jasmine and said she was visiting family. Chloe had been a good student in the specific way that has nothing to do with ease and everything to do with the decision to be present. She had made the decision somewhere around 6th grade, when a teacher named Ms. Ibarra had assigned an essay about a person who had influenced your life, and Chloe had written 3 drafts before handing in the final version, which was about her grandmother Patricia, and Ms. Ibarra had written in the margin, "You write like someone who has thought carefully about this." She had kept that comment. It was in a small box in her room alongside other things she had decided to keep, a movie ticket from the first film she had seen alone, a photograph of herself and Jasmine at 14 at the top of a hiking trail, tired and pleased with themselves. She was building, without knowing that was what she was doing, a record of her own life, the small daily accumulation of it. She wrote in a journal she kept under her mattress not because she was hiding it, but because that was where she had always kept it, and the habit had outlasted any particular reason. She wrote about school and about Jasmine and about Mr. Osai's history class, and about the way Phoenix looked at dusk when the light turned everything amber and rust. And she understood, even then, that she was going to leave it one day, and that leaving it would mean losing this particular light, which was a loss she could hold because the leaving was going to be toward something, even before she knew what that something was. The night before the taping, she had called Jasmine from the hotel room. She had said she was visiting family. Jasmine had said which family, and Chloe had said it's complicated. Jasmine, who had known her since 3rd grade and had learned that complicated from Chloe meant real and not yet fully processed, had said okay. "You okay?" Chloe had said she was. Jasmine had said, "Text me tomorrow," not asking what was happening, not pushing, just staying present across a distance, which was something Jasmine was good at. After they hung up, Chloe sat on the hotel bed with the duck in her lap and thought about what she would say to Jasmine afterward. Not the script of it, but the fact of having to find language for something she did not yet have language for. She was going to meet her mother tomorrow. She was going to walk through a door on a television stage, and there was going to be a woman on the other side of it who had been writing letters that ended with "whenever you are ready," and she was going to find out what it meant to be ready. She put the duck on the pillow beside her and turned off the light and lay in the dark and let herself not know for a few more hours, which was the last time she would not know, which she understood even then, and which felt like a thing worth marking. On the morning of the taping, she woke at 5:30. She was not frightened exactly. She thought about the last letter, the line she had memorized, "I don't need you to forgive anything or understand anything. I just need you to know that you were loved from the first second of your life and every second since, without interruption, without condition, without end." She thought about the word interruption, about how a person who was absent could still insist in writing on the absence having been against her will. She got up and showered and put on the yellow cardigan she had chosen deliberately and picked up the duck and went to knock on Patricia's door. On the stage, Steve came back through the side door and walked to the center with the deliberateness of a man who understood that certain moments require you to slow down rather than speed up, that rushing is a form of disrespect to things that have waited a long time. The room had gone very still. The Caldwells were watching him. Renee was standing in the middle of her family, still holding the photographs, her face at the place it goes before something that cannot be rehearsed. He said, "I need you to trust me for 1 minute." Renee said, "Okay." He said, "I need you to turn around." The door at the back of the stage opened, not dramatically. The way important doors open, with the careful deliberateness of something that has been a long time in the opening and knows it. She walked onto that stage the way you walk towards something you have prepared for without being able to prepare for it, steady and present, one step at a time, carrying the duck against her side under one arm, yellow cardigan, dark, watchful eyes that were her mother's eyes, her mother's shoulders rolled back before something hard. 16 years old, taller than Renee had imagined, entirely recognizable. Renee did not move. 4 seconds. The room held 4 full seconds of complete stillness. 4 seconds is long enough for a woman to look at a teenager she has not seen since she was 4 months old and recognize something, in the set of the shoulders, in the particular quality of the waiting, in the way the body organizes itself before something difficult, something she knows from the inside, from her own mornings, from her own bathroom mirror. And then something broke open in her face, quietly. The way ice breaks in early March on the Ohio River, not with a crash but with a slow, inevitable release. The kind of opening that has been building so long that when it finally happens it is almost silent. She crossed that stage and she put her arms around her daughter, and Chloe put her arms around her mother, and the duck got pressed between them and neither of them noticed, and they stayed that way without speaking for a long time. Chloe had thought, lying awake at 5:30, that she did not know what it would feel like to walk through that door. She had tried to prepare for a range of outcomes. She had not prepared for the particular thing that happened, which was that she recognized her mother before she reached her. Not visually, not from photographs, but from the shoulders, from the way Renee had her shoulders set back, and her hands open at her sides in the posture of someone bracing for something and refusing to flinch from it. Chloe knew that posture. She had seen it in her own mirror. She had felt it in her own body on mornings before things that could not be rehearsed. She had not known, until that moment, that she had been given it by someone she had not seen since she was 4 months old, which meant she had not learned it, which meant she had simply inherited it, which was the first evidence she had ever encountered of inheritance as something other than an abstract concept. She walked toward her mother, and her mother turned around, and they looked at each other for 4 seconds, and then they closed the distance between them. And what Chloe felt when her mother's arms came around her was not the complicated thing she had braced for, but something much simpler, a recognition, a settling, the particular feeling of something that had been open for a long time finally being held. The room held. 300 people held their breath in something that was not quite silence and not quite sound, a collective suspension, the way a cord hangs between its tension and its resolution, waiting. Aunt Mee held her empty sandwich wrapper and did not move and did not speak, which was the most remarkable thing that happened in that room. Donna covered her mouth with both hands. Darius was still. Felicia wept openly. Patricia, at the edge of the stage, watched her granddaughter hold a woman she had never met and felt something settle inside her that she had not fully known was unsettled. Steve Harvey turned away for a moment, and then he turned back because you have to turn back. When Renee finally lifted her face, she said one word, "Hi." And Chloe said, "Hi, Mom." The room exhaled, all of it all at once, like a held note finally released. Steve walked over when they were ready, not before, but when, and he stood with them and he spoke the way a man speaks when he has been doing something long enough to understand which moments require nothing but honesty. He said, "There is nothing in this world more powerful than a love that refuses to give up. Not distance, not time, not paperwork or years of silence or all the ways life has of making you feel like the door is closed for good. Nothing." He looked at Chloe. "You had a mother who loved you every single day of your life, every single one, without interruption and without condition." He looked at Renee. "And you raised a daughter even from 1,000 miles away, even through the letters and the waiting and all the years of it. You raised a daughter who came back." He let it settle. "That is not television. That is just life getting it right. And when life gets it right, we all get to be in the room for it." Chloe looked at her mother. Neither of them spoke. But something passed between them that 300 people saw and recognized without being able to name it. The particular look of two people understanding simultaneously that what they thought was over was actually just beginning. That evening, after the producers had wrapped and the studio had emptied of everything except the hum of equipment on standby, Renee sat in her Atlanta hotel room and was very still for a long time. Donna had taken the others to dinner. Chloe was at her hotel with Patricia. The room was quiet. The Atlanta skyline was in the window, indifferent and alive, the way cities are at night, going on being themselves, unconcerned with the interior weather of the people looking out at them. Renee sat on the edge of the bed and took the wallet out of her purse and opened it to the sleeve. Both photographs. The 9-month-old asleep with the duck, the edges soft from 16 years of the same hands. She looked at the photograph the way she had looked at it every day for 16 years. And she noticed for the first time that the looking felt different, not less meaningful, different. It had been for 16 years an act of maintenance, the daily practice of holding a fact that required holding, because otherwise the world would fill the space with other facts. Now it was something else. Now it was the beginning of a record, the first photograph in a story that was finally going to have more pages. She put the wallet back in her purse. She called Donna and asked her to bring something from the restaurant. And she sat at the window and watched Atlanta be a city, and felt, for the first time in a long time, that the present tense was a place she was fully allowed to live. In the days after the taping, the clip traveled through the world with the speed that true things travel at. 40 million views in 72 hours. 63 million by the end of the week. Comment sections filled with something unusual for the internet, not argument, not performance, but confession. A woman in Lansing wrote, "I called my son tonight. He has been estranged for 11 years. He picked up. I didn't know what to say. I said, 'I'm sorry and I love you and I've been ready.' He said, 'I know, Mom.' We talked for 2 hours. A man in Edinburgh wrote, 'There is a letter from my daughter sitting on my desk that I have been too frightened to open for 4 months. I opened it tonight. I'm going to write back. I don't know what to say yet, but I am going to say something.' A woman in Sao Paulo wrote in Portuguese that she had not spoken to her mother in 6 years and had bought a plane ticket for Tuesday. She did not know how it would go. She was going anyway. Steve Harvey read some of these on his phone in his dressing room that evening. He had told his assistant he needed 30 minutes. He sat there for 45. He did not tell anyone. Renee and Chloe spent that first night in Atlanta talking until past 2 in the morning. Donna had taken the others to dinner, and Aunt Mee had brought her sandwich wrapper to the restaurant out of habit, and the staff had accommodated this without comment. And in the hotel room with the Atlanta skyline in the window, they began the long, careful work of knowing each other from scratch. They started with small things because small things are the door. Chloe's school. A history teacher named Mr. Osa who talked about the past like it was still happening, which she respected. 2 books read simultaneously, alternating chapters. A best friend named Jasmine. Opinions about sandwiches. The sandwich conversation made Renee laugh unexpectedly, a real sudden laugh, and then Chloe laughed too, and they looked at each other with the slightly startled quality of 2 people discovering they find the same thing funny. Around midnight, Chloe reached into her bag and took out the 9 letters, still in their envelopes. In order, she set them on the bed between them. She said, "I found these 2 years ago. I read them. I should have written back." Renee looked at them for a long time. At the envelopes she had addressed to a house in Phoenix, the handwriting of a younger version of herself who had been trying to reach across a distance she could not close any other way. Then she said, "You're here now," which was the right thing. Which was the truest thing. Which made Chloe reach for her, and they held on in the quiet of the Atlanta night. And outside the window, Atlanta went on being a city. And inside the room, something was being built from all the years of its absence, which is one of the harder and more worthwhile things a person can do. Patricia flew home the next morning. At the departures hall, she held Chloe's face in both hands the way she had done since the girl was 9, a gesture that said, "I see you, I am with you, you are not alone in this." She said, "I should have given you those letters sooner." Chloe said, "I know." Patricia said, "I'm sorry." Chloe said, "I know that too." They held on, and then Patricia went through security, and Chloe went back to the hotel and had breakfast with Renee and talked until Chloe's afternoon flight. And at the gate, Renee said, "Call me when you land," and Chloe said, "I will," and both of them understood that this was the beginning of a rhythm and not an ending. Chloe flew to Gallipolis for Thanksgiving, her first time in Ohio, her first time seeing the river, which was broader and grayer and slower than she had expected from photographs, and which she found herself unexpectedly drawn to, the way you can be drawn to something that is simply itself without apology. She stood on the bank of the river the afternoon she arrived, with Renee beside her and the November cold coming off the water, and looked at it for a long time. Renee did not rush her. They stood together and said nothing for a while, and both of them felt the quietness of it, the way certain places are quiet in a way that is different from silence, inhabited quiet, the quiet of somewhere that has been witness to a long time of things. Renee told her that her mother, Carolyn, used to walk to this bank every evening in the summer, that she had a particular spot on the concrete wall where she always stood, and that after she died, Renee had come to that same spot many times. Chloe looked at the concrete wall. She thought about a woman she never got to meet, who had bought a duck and written for the one who is coming. She picked up a flat stone and skipped it across the water, which she was terrible at but which seemed like the right thing to do. Renee laughed, and Chloe laughed, and the Ohio River went on being itself, slow and indifferent and entirely unconcerned, and they stood there together until it got too cold to stay, and then a while longer anyway. Donna opened the restaurant in the spring. She had planned to call it something modest, something geographical. She filled out the name on the application, and the word she wrote was Renee's, and she submitted it without changing it. Renee cried when she saw the sign. Donna said, "Don't make it weird." Donna then cried too. Aunt Mee took a photograph and did not comment because she had had a feeling 2 years ago and the feeling had been correct and she did not require acknowledgement for that. Chloe has been to Gallipolis 4 times. She calls on Sunday evenings, not because it was agreed to, but because it is the pattern that formed on its own, the way honest patterns form, by 2 people showing up for the repetition. She argued with Darius about sunsets, Ohio versus Arizona, a debate that has no resolution and is not intended to have one. She flew back to Phoenix after the Thanksgiving visit with a jar of river water she had collected on a walk with Renee, which she keeps on her desk next to the duck. Darius called it the most Ohio thing he had ever heard. Chloe said that was the entire point. Patricia came to Ohio in the fall. She and Renee sat on the porch and drank coffee and talked, carefully at first, and then more honestly, as people do when they have both put something down they have been carrying for a long time and found the other person is not who they had imagined. They did not arrive at a clean resolution. They arrived at something more workable, a mutual acknowledgement of a shared love, and the understanding that loving the same person well is enough to build on. What they were building was not the relationship they would have had if the years had gone differently. It was not a recovered version of something that had existed and been interrupted. It was something new and its own, built entirely out of the present tense, which had its own difficulties and its own particular grace. Renee had to learn and kept learning how to be Chloe's mother without filling in the missing years, how to listen to stories about ninth and 10th grade as new information rather than trying to locate them in a timeline she had been absent from. Chloe had to learn how to have a mother, which is a thing that sounds simple and is not, which is a skill that requires practice and the willingness to be imperfect at it while you are learning. They were both imperfect at it. They both showed up anyway. That was the practice. That was what it looked like, two people, one of whom had been waiting for 16 years and one of whom had been coming for 2, meeting in the middle of all that history and deciding to begin from here. Not from before, not from what was lost, from here. From the Sunday evening calls and the November river and the sandwich opinions and the sunset arguments and all the ordinary accumulation of it. From here, which was where they were, which was enough, which was more than enough, which was everything. Renee still carries both photographs in her wallet. She does not need them the way she needed them before. But she keeps them because they are the record of the time when love had to be patient enough to wait for itself to be found, and she does not want to forget what patient looks like. Not because it was painful, though it was, but because it was faithful, and faithfulness deserves to be remembered. It is the hardest version of love. It is the one that does not get witnessed, that happens in ordinary rooms in small towns, in mornings before work, in the practice of looking at a photograph and confirming that someone exists, in the writing of letters to addresses that may no longer be current. It is the version nobody writes songs about. It is the version that was always going to win. The yellow duck has a specific weight that Chloe has known all her life, the way it sits slightly heavy in the body, weighted by design or perhaps by time, by decades of being carried and held and kept and waited with. She knows its weight the way you know the weight of something you have held in every room you have ever slept in every life stage you have moved through without ever being fully told why. She knows now. A woman named Carolyn, who died in a hospital in Ohio 14 months before Chloe was born, bought a yellow duck and wrapped it in yellow paper and wrote on the tag, "For the one who is coming." And then Carolyn died, and the duck passed to Renee, and Renee put it in a hospital bassinet in Cincinnati. And then the duck went to Phoenix in the hands of a woman named Patricia, who kept it on a shelf wrapped in tissue paper for 16 years because some things are not for keeping. They are for returning when the person they belong to is finally ready to receive them. The duck waited. For 16 years it waited, on nightstands in 3 different houses, in a box on a high shelf, in a suitcase on an airplane to Atlanta, under the arm of a girl in a yellow cardigan walking through a door at the back of a stage. And now it sits on a nightstand in Phoenix, and it is not waiting anymore. It has been returned. The one who was coming came. The one who was waiting waited. And the rest of it is happening now, in all the ordinary ways that matter most, in phone calls on Sunday evenings, in arguments about sunsets, in a restaurant called Renee's on a river in Ohio, in a jar of river water on a desk in Phoenix, in the small daily accumulation of a life that has, finally, its full cast of people. 16 years is a long time to hold the open end of something, but the story always knew where it was going. It was waiting for a woman with 2 photographs in a wallet and 16 years of practice at Faithful. It was waiting for a girl in a yellow cardigan on a morning when ready looked like simply walking through the door. It was waiting for a stage in Atlanta and a man who knew to ask the right question and a door at the back of the room that was always going to open. And it opened, and there she was. And the rest of it, the Sunday calls and the Ohio winters and the sunset arguments and the restaurant on the river and all the ordinary years of it, the unwitnessed ordinary years that are the actual substance of a life, the rest of it is happening right now. If this story stayed with you, if you know what it is to love something from a distance, to keep writing to an address that may no longer be current, to carry a photograph worn soft from the same hands at the same time every morning, stay with us. There are more moments like this one waiting right here on this channel. Every single one of them is worth your time.